The views and opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily those of this station, JVC Broadcasting Management, or its sponsors.
Welcome to Crime and Justice Radio, where we talk all things crime, justice, mayhem, and the courts with expert insiders and legal outcasts. I'm Aida Leisenring, and I'm here with Bruce Barquette. Hello, Bruce.
Hello, Aida. How are you today?
I'm well. Happy Memorial Day. Is that right? Do you say Happy Memorial Day?
I think you do, but we are going to try to remember what Memorial Day is all about. In addition to talking our typical crime and justice issues, one of the things that we'll have on today, or our guest today, will be the Honorable Terrence Murphy, a county court judge in Nassau County, New York. He presides over the most serious felonies. But the reason why we're having him on is not just because he's a judge, but because of his 26 years of service in the military. He is a recently retired lieutenant colonel who served the country both as a judge and in the Army. And
he started in Nassau County, or he was the first judge to oversee Veterans Court.
Absolutely correct. Memorial Day, as we know it now, actually began as, quote, Decoration Day, and it began in New York, in Waterloo, New York, which is up in the Finger Lakes region. It became an official holiday in 1971, I believe, and it has a bit of a history to it. Some of it has poppy seeds and red flowers, symbolizing the death of soldiers, and that ultimately is what Memorial Day is about, and we're going to spend a few minutes talking about that before we get into some criminal justice issues.
And given that this is a tribute to those who sacrificed their lives fighting for what America stands for, I do want to go over the numbers of soldiers that we've lost. And it's not just the loss in numbers, it's also the sacrifices that their family members made. Since 1900, I didn't know this, so I'm fascinated. Since 1900, World War I, we've lost 626,467 soldiers. I think the number of actual injuries was well over 1.1 million. And since 2001 to the present day, we've lost a total of 7,107 soldiers. Injured soldiers is at over 53,000. And that includes, Operation Enduring Freedom, Operation Iraqi Freedom. In fact, Iraqi Freedom saw the largest number of losses of soldiers at over 4,000 soldiers.
And we have to remember, when we thank people for their service, and it's a phrase you hear a lot, it's almost like God bless you after someone sneezes, that you don't think about it much. What we're actually thanking them for is thanking them for risking their lives to protect our freedoms and protect our country and to protect our way of life. It is a monumental task that very few individuals take on, very few of our citizens take on. I grew up in the 60s and 70s. Joining the Army just wasn't something you did, at least not in my neighborhood, and I didn't. I'm not sure I regret it or I don't regret it. I did what I did. But looking back, I do feel as though I should have spent some time serving the country in some way. I was a prosecutor, and I suppose that counts. But it's nowhere near what's needed for to protect the country in the way that soldiers have.
Well, I'm ready to serve our country, so you know this about me. I was born in Spain, and I actually was a permanent resident for a very, very long time. And when you're young, you just don't think about it. And I kept putting off my citizenship application. But finally, at the constant nagging of my father, who was right to nag me, I decided to apply and become a citizen. And my father was so proud. And I invited so many friends that actually came to, I think it was 500 Pearl Street service. And there were so many other people, so much diversity, and other family members. And it was just a happy day. Like, everyone in the room was happy. But then I had to take an oath. And my friends obviously had never really sat through a naturalization process. And I don't recall if I knew the oath I was going to take, but you swear your hand. I'm going to read you some of that oath. I literally said, I hereby declare on oath that I will support and defend the Constitution and laws of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I will bear arms on behalf of the United States when required by the law, that I will perform non-combatant service in the armed forces of the United States when required by the law, that I will perform work of national importance under civilian direction when required by the law, and that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, so help me God. My friend Melissa literally turns to me and said, did you just enlist in the Army or become a citizen? I said, I kind of feel like I did both.
Both. You did both. One of the things that you did is you promised to go into the Army if the government required you to or asked you to. Ironically, I was born a citizen. I was born in Germany. My dad was in the service at the time of my birth, so I was born in the American Military Hospital in Landstuhl, Germany. Spent a year there. Don't recall it all that well, but I don't ever remember being required to take that oath. I think it comes just from our citizenship. We're expected to do that.
Isn't that interesting, though? Because people are born citizens and they don't understand the oath that other people take, really, that it's an oath that everyone should have to take at some point in their life. Until
you just read that, I had never known what the oath was, and it's really remarkable.
I feel like I'm more committed to our country than you are, Bruce.
you might be.
You haven't taken the oath yet.
You might be. Well, and as I said, the service that we're thanking people for is risking their lives, and unfortunately, people who risk their lives sometimes lose their lives, and that's what Memorial Day is about. So I want us to focus, if we can, for just a minute on the loss of life that happens. And you mentioned it's not just the soldiers, it's the soldiers and their families. The people that are left behind have that gap, that hole in their lives that will never be fulfilled. And I'm going to take very briefly two stories from two soldiers, Clive Garcia and Brendan Looney, both of whom were mentioned in a Washington Post article written by, Kyle Longley about a year ago. And one, Mr. Garcia, or Sergeant Garcia, died in the Vietnam War. He was drafted. He's from Arizona. And at his gravesite, his mother stood up and said, "Thank you for being my son. Oh, my dear boy, thank you so much." And then a reporter noted, and so Sergeant Garcia, U.S. Marine Corps, was laid to rest in the rocky red earth he loved so well. And to this day, his family is still grieving over his loss. His mother mentioned in an ABC interview, "I thank God for lending him to me. I had him so long, 22 years, but God wants him back." And that was 50 years ago. And more recently, in 2011, Lieutenant Brendan Looney, while the class composition of the military hadn't changed in Vietnam, Americans coming in the age of the new millennium witnessed caskets arriving in large numbers from combat zones for the first time. One of those caskets was his, Lieutenant Brendan Looney. He died when his helicopter crashed on September 21st, 2010 in Afghanistan. He was on his last mission. His widow, Amy, who he had married just one day before he shipped out, struggled with the loss, but she had the support, including the parents of good friends who had also lost individuals who died in Iraq earlier. He was ultimately buried at Arlington National Cemetery with 4,000 people sending him off, 4,000 soldiers. Quite striking when you stop and think about it.
I love the mother saying, thank you, God, for lending him to me.
Yes.
Beautiful.
Yes. And there's a poem that was written after World War I.
Remembrance Day.
Remembrance Day.
And the Remembrance Day symbolism of the poppy started with this poem, written by a World War I brigade surgeon who was struck by the sight of the red flowers growing on a ravaged battlefield. That's John McCrae. I'm going to go ahead and read it. In Flanders fields, the poppies blow between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky, the larks, still bravely singing, fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead, short days ago. We lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw. The torch be yours to hold it high. If ye break with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders fields.
And the part of that poem that really hits home for me is we are the dead. Short days ago, we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders fields. It is something we should remember, and we want to take a few minutes out of our show to pay a tribute to the soldiers who have died, to the families who have lost individuals, and remember what Memorial Day or Decoration Day is really all about.
And lost for our right to any religion, free speech, to be free from cruel and unusual punishment, to live, to work, to do whatever we want to do.
That's right. They didn't die for anything. We have a great country that we have them to thank for. Want to take just a minute to pay tribute, if you will, to our sponsor, which happens to be our law firm, Barquette, Epstein, Kieran, Aldea, and Laturco. We are a firm centered here in New York, but we cover or handle cases across the country, all forms of litigation, specifically criminal defense, trial and appellate work, and civil rights cases. You can find us at www.barquetteepstein.com or call us at 516-745-1500. Honored to work there, honored to be part of the firm, thrilled to have people like Aida Leisenring working with us. Aida, let's move. You mentioned the rights that we are enjoying in this country. One of them is the right to be free of cruel and unusual punishment and the right to due process of laws. And it might be an odd transition, but I think it's important to talk today about prisoners of war, and not American prisoners of war, but prisoners of war our country has held for 20 years in Guantanamo Bay.
And it's in the news right now because the Biden administration has cleared 3 Guantanamo detainees for release. And I actually hadn't thought about Guantanamo Bay in a long time. There's not that much news coverage on it. But at some point, there were 700 detainees. And for years now, we've had 40. And what's fascinating to me is that we've not only had 40 people there for nearly 2 decades, but only 2 are convicted, from what I understand. Only 7 are charged. 3 others have been recommended for charges. But the rest are only there due to suspicions of ties with Al-Qaeda, Taliban, and so forth. And they've had 0 due process, and they've been there for 19, 18, 17 years in the dark.
and as I understand it, they haven't been treated well.
No, they have not. Obviously, waterboarding was a big issue. This all came up during the Bush administration, and then Obama vowed to end Guantanamo Bay in 1 year. He failed to do that. He actually, it was resisted by bipartisan Congress. It wasn't just Republicans that were resisting this. And Trump obviously didn't end what's going on in Guantanamo Bay, and Biden claims that he wants to fulfill the promise of his Obama years. So he just cleared 3 for release, but they're still not released. And like many of the individuals that are there, the reasons for not releasing them is because they've been deemed impossible to do so safely for security reasons. So there's actually people there that have been cleared or are innocent. and they're still suffering away indefinitely, which is just shocking to me. No due process. I'm not sure that everyone who isn't charged has a lawyer, but I would want to know that. And I don't know why there's not more noise about this.
It's been going on for 20 years, and after a while, it just becomes kind of a white noise in the background. And I want to be clear, we have no sympathy for the causes that these people fought. They took up arms against our country. Some of them may be responsible for killing our soldiers. It may be that some of them, not all necessarily, but some of them deserve some form of punishment or a trial or something to keep us safe from their activities. So we're not endorsing them. We're not here to say, look, they're good people, we should just let them go. I don't know. But one of the things that we have to recognize is that how we treat prisoners is the best that our soldiers will be treated. They won't be treated any better than how we treat the worst or the worst treatment we provide others. And John McCain, who obviously spent years in a Vietnam prison camp, was tortured, and while he was alive, fought vigorously for humane treatment of prisoners and for due process rights, because he recognized that how we treat other people is how our soldiers will be treated. And he did it not for the individuals that were captured on the battlefield, but for our soldiers that would be captured on the battlefield in the future.
But I do want to take a moment to say, I don't believe in torture, whether you're guilty or not. But some of the individuals that were rounded up because the U.S. offered reward money to individuals in Afghanistan, for example. I think the majority of them are from Afghanistan, to turn in people suspected of having Taliban ties. So, somebody says, I think that person might have ties, I want my $5,000. And then they've been in Guantanamo Bay for 18, 19 years without being charged, without having due process, without seeing the inside of a courthouse, and being tortured. I heard from one prisoner who was there in solitary confinement for 9 years, and then spent a total of 15 before he was released. The descriptions of what they underwent included being stripped naked, having their clothes taken off of them, being punched, people's heads being banged into bathroom sinks, being thrown into toilet water. It's just horrific. And don't forget, it's 20 years later. So one of the individuals that Biden cleared for release is 73 years old. So we don't think about that. 73 years old, and he had a number of health problems.
Look, we have to be able to provide due process to individuals that we capture in this way. As you know, some of them have been cleared, which cleared means they didn't do anything. They were innocent. And they were wrongly captured, wrongly taken by our country, perhaps because of the nature of the rewards that were being offered, and were held for years without cause. And you want to, you kind of talk about winning your hearts and minds. You're not winning too many hearts or too many minds if you're taking innocent people away from their country, away from their families, and incarcerating them in a camp outside the United States without due process and torturing them. That's crazy.
And at a financial cost to Americans. And I say that because I read an article that between 2013 to 2018, the cost of detaining inmates there jumped 90 million. And
90 million?
90
There's
million.
only 40 of them there left.
Well, right. Why was it costing more when you had even less individuals? Well, obviously soldiers get raises over time. They had to fix the infrastructure. Everything has to be imported from outside vendors. But there are 1,800 soldiers assigned to the 40 detainees.
Unbelievable. That's
45 soldiers per detainee. And also the other rising cost was the medical cost because of the aging population. So one individual had like atrophying disc issues and ended up becoming paralyzed in his cell and needed to undergo 4 neurological surgeries to try and undo the damage.
Look, and I think that this also affects American citizens and American prisoners. It in a way, it deadens our sensitivity to how we treat prisoners, and we can't treat prisoners, be they foreign detainees that were captured in war or American prisoners who were convicted of a crime and are serving a sentence in jail or in prison, badly. It's just beneath us, and frankly, it shames the sacrifice that soldiers made to protect our way of life. Part of that way of life is the Constitution. Part of that Constitution is the 8th Amendment, and part of that Constitution is due process.
And I always, we call it the law of the land. I think it should be the law of our hearts, right? We go into other countries and we fight for what we believe is good. I mean, putting aside political wars and so forth, right? And so if you believe that it's right on American soil, you should believe it's the way all over the globe.
Right. And we absolutely should. We're going to be back in just a moment with Judge Terrence Murphy from Nassau County, who's also a retired lieutenant colonel from the Army, who spent 26 years serving our country, deserves to be thanked for it, and he is a really good man.
Welcome back to Crime and Justice Radio. I'm Aida Leisenring. I'm here with Bruce Barquette, and we have an extraordinarily special guest and a perfect guest for Memorial Day, Judge Terrence Murphy, born and raised in Long Island. He is currently a county court judge in Nassau, presiding over the most serious criminal matters, while in the district court, which handles misdemeanors, he started Veterans Court in Nassau. He's also a retired lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army. He served as a judge advocate and in Kuwait and Iraq. His career from a soldier to lawyer to soldier again. Here we are. Hello, Judge Murphy. How you doing?
Hi, Aida. How are you?
Well,
Judge, nice to speak to you again. How you doing?
Hello, Bruce. Good to hear from you and speak with you.
Thanks so much for spending a few minutes to talk to us today or this evening about your life, your service, both as a judge and as an enlisted man, and then ultimately an officer in the Army on Memorial Day. And let me start off right away and ask what Memorial Day means to you.
Well, as the name infers, it's a time to remember those who have made the ultimate sacrifice in service to our country, and also those who have passed after having served our country. It was originally called Decoration Day, where after the Civil War, where it was determined that some sort of recognition should be had to the memories of the soldiers who died in the Civil War, and it was chosen to be the month of May because that's when the flowers started to bloom, and it was an appropriate time to show a rebirth and a remembrance of those individuals who passed.
So when I introduced you, and just so everybody knows, we practice in front of you from time to time. And look, I'm not ashamed to say this. One of the great things that people will say about judges, and people say it about you, is your temperament and so forth, but you call them as you see them. In other words, you're fair. And that's a great thing, and you deserve a tremendous amount of credit for that. But you didn't start off as a judge. You joined the Army when you were how old?
17, right after high school. In 1970.
You didn't have to date yourself, but go ahead.
No, that's okay, because it's all in context. The Vietnam War was winding down. I had family members who served in Vietnam. I was an okay student in school. I didn't do as well as I could have, but maybe that was a sign of the times. And I knew I wasn't ready for college. So there was an option. I could go to work. I was working at a gas station pumping gas. I could continue to do that, or I could, try to be all that I could be, as the Army slogan and ad advertisements urged young men and young men at that time to do.
There's a lot of things that you could have done, and people who weren't alive or weren't old enough to remember it. I remember it. 1973 was no time to join the Army. This "thank you for your service" phrase that we hear a lot, that's not a phrase I bet you heard all that often after you joined the Army, was it?
No, it wasn't. But it was something that I decided that I needed to do. And I had experience with the military, in that my father served in World War II with his two brothers. And he also served in the Army Reserve. So I remember him as a child of 6 and 8 and 10 going off to his 2 weeks in the summer for Army service in his uniform. And the presents that he brought back to his 9 kids when he was done with his 2-week service.
So how did you end up going from an enlisted man, right? You joined I assume, as a private, 17-year-old private, yes, boot camp and so forth. How did you go from there to law school and then becoming a judge?
Well, that was a long and winding road, but I made it to the end of the road. At 17, I joined for 3 years of active duty. I was a radio operator in Germany. Was my permanent duty station. I served 2.5 years in Germany, and I came home. I started college at Nassau Community College, and I did 2 years there. And then I went to work. I did construction work and all types of other work. But then I joined the Postal Service. One of my friends in construction said, "Let's take the Postal Service test." I said, okay. And I was called to be a letter carrier in Seaford. They were known as mailmen then. And I got married. I started a family, and I told my wife it's time to go back to school. Being a mailman was probably one of the best jobs I ever had, but I knew I wouldn't be able to do it to 30 years till retirement. And so I went to night school. As I was working as a mailman, I completed my undergraduate, applied for law school at Toro College, and I was accepted. Toro College was a great opportunity because they were taking the unusual students. We had St. John's and we had Hofstra, but Toro advertised itself as the law school for those individuals who are looking for a second career or a different career path.
And so you eventually rejoined the Army, is that correct?
Yeah. In my last year of law school, I talked it over with my wife, and I said, I want to go back into the reserves. There were 2 reasons why. One, there was a tuition payment from the Army Reserve, and then the opportunity to become an officer once I was admitted to the bar. So I rejoined the reserves as an enlisted person, E4 specialist as a radio operator, although they immediately transferred me into a JAG office. And then once I graduated law school and was admitted to the bar, I applied for a commission to the JAG Corps and was accepted.
When you say a commission, you mean you became an officer?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And can you talk a little bit about how your life as a lifelong, right? You were in the service for 26 years total. Is that right?
I retired in 2015 after 26.5 years of service.
So now you're presiding over homicide trials, other serious cases, rapes, and so forth. How did your life as a soldier and as an officer, how does that interact, or how did that affect your tenure on the bench as a judge?
Well, I think you have to start out with a personality that's suitable and a temperament that's suitable for the bench, and I believe I was. And as a JAG officer, I was an advisor to commanders from small units up to a a one-star general command. And my job was to evaluate matters for the commander, to give him or her the pros and cons of courses of action, and to provide my best judgment as to what the most efficient and successful way to accomplish a mission would be, of course, within the bounds of the law. And that carried over into the bench. I had great experience as a law secretary for two judges, Judge Maxton and Judge Gerald Carter, who were wonderful judges. And with that experience, I do the same now as I did as a Army officer. I evaluate the evidence in what's presented to me. I research the law, and I apply the law to the facts that I find them in most matters.
I actually want to ask you about Veterans Court, but before we go there, I want to talk about your time when you were deployed in Operation Iraqi Freedom in Baghdad. And I understand that you served as a State Department liaison to the Iraqi judiciary. And I'm so fascinated by that. You investigated and developed prosecution strategies against Saddam Hussein. You developed logistical plans for the transporting and housing of high-value detainees for court appearances. And you even supervised the creation of an Iraqi Special Tribunal Defense Counsel office. So you pretty much helped initiate a criminal justice system from all sides, from the court to the prosecutor to the defense to the facilitating of inmates. What was that experience like?
Well, if you recall, there was a great question, international question posed, whether Saddam Hussein and members of his regime could get a fair trial in Iraq by Iraqis and for Iraqis. We, of course, America, were there in support of the Iraqi government, the new Iraqi government, and our job was to assist and advise the Iraqi judiciary to do their job, in which they were very well trained. Iraq had a robust legal system based on European law. It's a little bit different from American law.
Do they have jurors for trials, or is it judges that act as jurors?
It's a judicial tribunal.
Got it.
So they have judges who sit as a matter of three judges who hear the evidence and make rulings and judgments. And so our role as lawyers was to really simply assist the Iraqis to do a job that they were very capable of doing.
How were you received? How were you received by them, by Iraqi legal practitioners, so to speak?
Well, we were received very well when we offered our advice and counsel, but the Iraqis made it clear that it was their case for their people, and they would try the matter as they understood it to be tried. And we understood that too. And we had a mandate, if you will, to simply assist. And when I say assist, it means to bring in witnesses through logistical support. And with regard to defense counsel, to be able to facilitate the Iraqi Defense Bar, which was a standing organization, to have access to the multitude of prisoners, regime prisoners that were in custody in Iraq under American supervision.
So they were in custody under American supervision, meaning that there was technically American witnesses that could see whether or not they were being treated fairly.
Yes, yeah. At the time, they were under American custody as a asset to the Iraqi government.
I'm sorry to interrupt. How you have a family, obviously. You have a wife. How many overseas deployments did you participate in?
Well, we had deployments for training, which were 2 and 3 week tours, whether down to South America or Germany. But for extended tours, I had 3. Quite frankly, I had Bosnia in 2002 in a peacekeeping role. Then Iraq for 4 or 5 months, 6 months, I believe, and then Kuwait was my last deployment. And that was for a year with the 143rd Logistics Command out of Orlando, Florida, which was my final duty station.
Earlier in the show, Bruce and I had talked about the number of soldiers that died in memoriam to Memorial Day. And what I noticed is since 2001, and we looked at different operations, Operation Enduring Freedom, Operation Iraqi Freedom, New Dawn, and so forth, the greatest number of soldiers that did not return home were from Operation Iraqi Freedom. Now, for those who did, coping, I imagine, from having clients myself who fought overseas, was difficult and tragic, and they often find themselves facing criminal charges. So I want to talk to you about what made you decide to open up Veterans Court in Nassau County.
Well, I didn't decide. I was asked to preside over that court by our district administrative judge, Judge St. George at the time, and who's still our district administrative judge. And they selected me, I believe, because of my military experience. There aren't many judges on the bench today that have military experience in Nassau County. I may be the only one at this time. And the administration, the judicial administration, thought my experience would help move that court, that specialty court, to a successful start. And I said yes. I said, sure, I'd love to do it. And I said that because, and that was really above and beyond my normal duties. It was an extra assignment, quite frankly. And I agreed to do it because I thought I could speak the same language as the veterans who would be in that court. I was an enlisted person. I started out, as Bruce alluded to, as a private in basic training in Fort Jackson, South Carolina. I understood the chain of command. I understood the role of the non-commissioned officer versus the role of the officer. And I knew very well the role of an enlisted person, and that is to obey orders. And I thought, go ahead, Bruce.
I was going to say, and you've had successes in that court, and I guess some not successes. And
well, for listeners, and if it's not obvious, Veterans Court seeks to help treat the issues that a veteran is facing, with the hopes to ultimately resolve and help that individual and potentially ensure that they don't end up with a criminal conviction. Is that right?
That's right. It's one of the specialty courts we now have in New York State and throughout the country that the philosophy is an alternative to incarceration, to rehabilitation and to treatment rather than incarceration. And most of these, well, one of the requirements to be eligible for the Veterans Court was, one, that you were a veteran, of course, and two, that the issues that brought you before the criminal justice system had to do with your military service and some sort of drug issue or alcohol issue. And so there was a eligibility evaluation between the district attorney's office and the assigned assistant district attorney and the court, and of course defense counsel. And I have to give credit to Kathleen Rice, who was the district attorney at the time, who agreed to open that court and process certain defendants through that court.
Good. Look, Judge, we want to thank you so much for coming on our show and chatting with everybody about this. And we want to take a moment to thank you for your service. You could have just been a lawyer and a judge, and I say just in quotes, but you opted to not only do that, but you served the country not once but twice as an enlisted man, as an officer. The people who appear in front of you are lucky to have your life experiences as part of the deliberative process that they're gonna experience, truly. So thank you so much for both the service and for the work you do on the bench.
Thank you, Bruce, and thank you, Aida.
Oh, thank you for coming on.
It's been my honor to serve the people of Nassau County as well as the people of our country in the military service, and I hope that all will just take a moment to remember those who gave their ultimate sacrifice in service to the country on Memorial Day before we start with the barbecues and the parties. But thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Judge. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye now.
Bye.
So, I'm reminded real quick of a boy that I played football with when I was young. Kind of Little League football when I was 11, 12 years old, Tom Smith. And I remember the day in, I believe it was 1983, that my mother came to me and said, Tom died. And I'm like, how did he die? And we were friends. I played football with him. He was killed in Beirut, in the barracks that was blown up. And I don't know what made me think of him right now, but I just did. So a nod to him and to his family. Hopefully they're doing okay. A nod
to Tom and to others, and as you said, to their families, because they make the sacrifice as well. Yep.
And again, I want to thank our law firm, Barquette, Epstein, Kieran, Aldea, and Turco.
Hope everyone is having a wonderful day with loved ones. Spreading joy and spreading taxi cab numbers, Ubers, Lyfts. Don't drink and drive.
Visit us at barquetteepstein.com or call us at 516-745-1500. We can handle all of your litigation needs from trials to appeal. Thanks again for the firm sponsoring us. We'll see you again next week with a special guest.
The views and opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily those of this station, JVC Broadcasting Management, or its sponsors. Or its sponsors. Or its sponsors. Or its sponsors. Or its sponsors.